Hello and welcome to Catholic in America. Today we're going to be talking about the universal ban that Pope Francis has called for against the practice of surrogacy.
So we're going to look at the implications of surrogacy, the moral reasons why we as Catholic Christians would be against it, and why Pope Francis has highlighted this as one of the problems facing our modern world.
So if you'd like to find out why surrogacy is a bad idea, you can read Genesis or you can pay attention when we come back.
Hello and welcome back to Catholic in America. Today I'm joined by Father Tom Dillon and Father Michael Nixon. My name is Father Doug Martin, and we're so glad you're here to join us for this very important conversation.
And we're talking about a light one today, Father Doug, Father Tom. We're talking about surrogacy, and the Pope has called for a universal ban on surrogacy. So yeah, just real light, breakfast conversation for us.
That's right. Today. What you talk about over coffee? Yeah. No big deals there, right? So why at this time? Why is Pope Francis highlighting this? It was in one of his conversations he was having, and he really highlighted several things. He was talking about some of the wars that are going on overseas. He was talking about nuclear weapons and those sorts of things, and then he mentioned this as well. And this, seemed to be from the article that I read the point of really what he wanted to talk about. And so, why at this time? Why in this time is he?
Why would he put a nuclear weapon right next and arms proliferation right next to surrogacy?
Right, sure. Or why is he even talking about it at all? I mean, is it this?
Well, I'll jump on that one. I think. I think because he's looking at this as in the kind of the Jesuit sense of not looking at the attacks of the enemy and the attacks on the church and the attacks on humanity in general in just a one-dimensional way. So obviously we have the arms race and we have possible nuclear proliferation, which is threatening the whole of humanity as a whole. But Pope Francis is also looking at the microcosm of the human family. And so there's atomic weapons that threaten us as a whole species, but then there's also these cancers and these other things that threaten the integrity of the basic building block of humanity. And the basic building block of humanity, which is necessary for us to continue to grow and to thrive and to, even if you want to say evolve, but we need to have males and females and children, and a healthy home life is necessary for the foundation of society to grow in a healthy way. And if you distort this and if you corrupt it by alternative means, which for the best of reasons, oftentimes well-intentioned, but can be disastrous. And this is why surrogacy is yet another thing which is growing in popularity, as we start seeing. And then there's also a lot of things that people don't realize as surrogacy is becoming more popular, as people are trying to have children outside the norm of male and female relations. This threatens not just the rights and dignities of the child, who has a right to a mother and a father, but also it threatens the very foundations of society. So this is something which is, it's not new. We've been doing surrogacy since Sarah and Abraham couldn't have children in the book of Genesis, and they decided to have a concubine, which is basically a surrogate, because that was the whole thing. Hagar was going to have Sarah's child, and then Sarah was going to adopt, and this was going to become her firstborn because they were having problems because it's
procreating,
with procreating. Yeah. And that's why for most part, a lot of concubines at that time was for the same reasons. So well-intentions, that's the thing, is people who want to have children, well-intentions, but as we know, well-intentioned people are sometimes the people who do the most disastrous damage unintentionally.
Right. Well, and this hasn't been talked about a whole lot. So that's the reason why somebody may be looking at this show or looking at what Pope Francis is saying why is he talking about this now? But like you said, there's a rise on it.
And in the Catholic context, I think, the moral teaching on this has been quite clear for a long time, ever since medical advances have led to the possibility of a surrogate standing in for, or kind of being the host of a baby, so to speak. Obviously, you know, back in ancient times, they had these processes, as Father Tom was alluding to. But so the desire for a child is not a bad thing. The desire for,
No.
It's one of the great gifts of God. The question then asks, so this is a good thing. We also need good means towards achieving that end. And so, for us, this understanding that sex means something, and sex is ordered towards children, and it makes sense, and is actually something holy within the context of a marriage, which is a lifelong union of one man and one woman for each other, for the bringing forward of children, for their mutual benefit and building up a society. So again, that's already kind of put us off from what society understands as marriage, or how sex has kind of been removed as marriage. So it is interesting that as a society, as we've kind of quite literally divorced sex from the context of marriage, really since the sexual revolution in the Western world, at least. Now we've divorced babies from sex, which is kind of a fascinating sort of thing. So you used to have this whole God made man and woman, and they're joined in marriage. You have sex within marriage, and you have babies, and all those things are connected to each other. Now we've divorced God from it. Now we've divorced marriage from sex. Now we divorce sex from babies with contraception. Now we divorce babies from sex. You can have babies without having sex with somebody. So in a sense, it's kind of like the great divorce, as that line that C.S. Lewis talked about. As we become further and further separated from it, now it becomes an industry, and this is really what Pope Francis was decrying too. Is we have an international industry of surrogacy, where women, usually in third world countries, their bodies are basically purchased. If you want, and again, I know that's putting it crassly, and I don't mean to be crass about just that reality, but that this is.
But it's truth. It's a true reality. Yeah.
Well, and then it becomes a social justice issue. Like a true social justice issue is the using people who are impoverished, right? Who want out and want the money and things like that for oftentimes to survive. But there's this whole thing of like, you want to have a child, so you're going to use someone who's poor, and then the abuse, and that's what people sometimes don't realize. Like sometimes you can have a person who's being abused against their will, but you can also have a person who's being abused because of socioeconomic reasons.
Right.
And so,
Right. Yeah.
And that's kind of an effect of it. But I think what the church is teaching, and again, highlighting that is important, recognizing this leads to the exploitation of the poor on a worldwide, the global, South or the global East, or different areas, throughout the world, where mostly Western kind of countries are the ones that are engaging in this practice. Couples, whether they're male-female couples or homosexual couples that want a baby and either can't conceive themselves or don't want to go through the pain and difficulty of conceiving themselves or the riskiness of that, then outsource this to another person through whatever means possible. So even if in a sense the exploitative nature weren't there, say if you could have a perfect situation of where people are well cared for, they're reimbursed, they know exactly what they're getting into, all that sort of stuff, that we would still say that this is intrinsically immoral because it's separating the sexual act from the bringing forward of new life. And once we've separated those, then we step into this place of kind of a moral travesty, and that's what we're seeking to avoid. We're seeking to say, okay, we need sexual integrity, and we have lost sight of that as a society, which is what opens up things like this industry to exist.
Yeah, I mean, and that is part of the problem. I mean, I think that's leading up to this. I mean, why is it such a problem now? Why is Pope Francis having to speak about this now? I think there's so many issues that go into it. I think you both have highlighted those well. But where do we? I mean, there's to a certain extent we begin to say, well, where do we go from here? How do we really combat this at least from the church's perspective? How are we to do this? How are we to, what should our response be? I mean, we see what Pope Francis says here, but I think I think he's pushing for more of a response as well. So what exactly are we to do about this?
Well, I think the first thing that we have to do is that we have to be in agreement, especially as a church, because that's where I think that we find, and I know you guys have experienced this as well. Like you even talk with Catholics, and they're just like, well, people have a hard time getting pregnant, and like this is a wonderful, beautiful way in which a person and you can come up with some like really beautiful, selfless people who are trying to help other people with the best of intentions. try to, like, for instance, like an aunt or a sister of a guy who can't get pregnant, and so they decide, like, so on the surface level, like many of these stories which are used as examples are from good and well intentions. The problem is that, one, it opens up the door to gross travesty and to gross abuse of and break down the family, as well as abuse and exploitation of the poor. Increases the possible growing divide between the rich and the wealthy. Like, you have so many problems that open up with this. And so, but I think that the first thing is, like, we have to be, as a church, we have to be unified on this, that this is, one, it's wrong.
Right.
Like, it's wrong, regardless of your intent. Your ends don't justify your means. That's utilitarianism. Like, just because you have a good intention doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. Because that's the very opposite of the gospel.
Yeah, even if you have someone willing to do it. I mean, I think back to, this is going to date me a little bit, but I think back to that TV show Friends, and I remember there was one storyline in that show where the brother had married an older woman. Phoebe's brother had married an older woman, and so she was past the procreating age. So what they did was they took her eggs that were still there and her brother's sperm and put them in Phoebe, his sister. And so his sister wound up having 3 babies for him. So lots of times we talk about the exploitation of this, but we have this going on as well, where there's friends, where there's family members, where there's people who's willing to say, yeah, sure, I'll have a baby for you. I mean, we're not going to procreate together, but I'll take the egg and the sperm, the zygote, and I'll have the baby for you.
Yeah, but then in that sense, like, and that's where this might upset people, what I'm going to say, right? Yeah. But that's where you are having a child with your sister, right? It is a form. It is, and now people are like, no, they didn't have sex, but it's a form of incest,
right?
Like, it is that can be a form of incest if it's familial, and so I mean. It can be a form of incest. It's a blending of boundaries, psychological.
Either way, it's adultery in this way.
Yeah, psychological and emotional for that child who's going to grow up later. It's a blending of healthy dynamics and boundaries. So it opens up this whole wide plethora because we can come up with a good reason, and it appeals to our emotions, which I don't have a problem with appealing to emotions, as long as the appeal of the emotions takes place within the lines of justice, of what is right. And that's where you have to take account all the rights of all the individuals involved, including the child. And see, the problem with surrogacy, as well as a lot of these different things with IVF, vitro fertilization, and things like this, is that the child becomes the product of a system. And therefore, it becomes the product of manufacturing. That's one of the reasons I think why Pope Francis is speaking out against it so harshly, or seemingly harshly. Actually, in fact, I think it's mercy. He's seeking mercy for all people. But that's why he's speaking out, because Pope Francis has been very consistent in his message. I know that he's a controversial figure because he oftentimes says things off the cuff, but he's been very consistent in his message and the narrative that human beings are not the product of a manufacturing system. And when you turn people into the product of a manufacturing system, which is what the well-intentioned people do when they get involved in processes like this, the child becomes a product, and it's an attack upon personhood.
Yeah. You cut off there, Tom. You said the child. If you want to repeat that last part there, Tom. You froze up, Tom. What was that last part? You said the child.
The child becomes the product of a process, and it ends up being an attack upon their personhood, because the child is a product of the manufacturing.
So, and I think it's important for us to say, obviously, any child, maybe not obviously, any child who's a product of whatever means, even immoral ones, IVF and other things too that we would consider immoral, but they still have inherent dignity. They still have
absolutely
worth and dignity and value. So that's important to recognize. But I think
that's almost why we're talking about this too, though, is because of that. Sorry,
but it shows to me the I've never watched Friends before, Doug. So when you said that example, I was automatically kind of horrified by it, but I recognize that this is a common thing, and so I don't mean this, to be.
And it's the mid-'90s when this happened. So right. This show was mid-'90s, so 30 years ago.
It's much more prevalent now, and again now with the rise of the internet, it's become an international phenomenon across borders and across lines. I think one of the reasons why Pope Francis spoke about this too, because this is a huge thing. There's no ban on it within Ukraine, so a lot of Russian women are having Ukrainian women be their surrogates, and so there was that whole kind of strange, now they're at war with each other. So there's all that kind of added, intensified weirdness and confusion. But what it shows to me is that we've now separated the sex from our sex, the act of sex, from our very bodies. We're so divorced, we're so separated, we're so at war with ourselves even, that we would see no problem of like, oh yeah, we can just take the sexual ingredients for the male and female and put them in somebody else's body, and it means nothing to that person. Now, if that person happens to be, one of our sister, or if that person happens to be a poor person in a third world country, in a sense, it doesn't matter because they're just sort of the incubator for this. So but we would say it does matter. What you do with your body matters. And I think that's maybe the fundamental thing against this neo-Gnostic age that we're in, that we'd say that your body matters profoundly. What you do with your body matters as well. That our bodies are a theology. They're a revelation of who God is, particularly within our sexual organs. And so that's so countercultural. And so I think when the Pope says this, it's almost like people can't even, what does he not want people to have kids? That's mean. So it's showing like a fundamental disconnect that's happening right now.
I did see that as a response, by the way. What, does he not want us to even have children?
Yeah.
I mean, you get these ridiculous statements, but also the attack on the attack on motherhood, like motherhood, because that's the whole thing. Is like, who's the mother of the child, right? Because if we'd reduce motherhood to mere biological elements, so that the only thing which makes me a mother is my egg, and the only thing which makes me a father is the sperm, right? And therefore you have the creation of the zygote. But what about the development? Now, part of motherhood is obviously biological, right? But the other part of motherhood is relational, and the ongoing relationship, within the womb. Like the surrogate is the mother, because part of motherhood is the ongoing relationship of where she pours her blood, like her very own life force, into this child. And so like, that's the thing, is like, you can say, well, it's not my egg. Yeah, but there's a lot more that goes into creation of a embryo, and I mean, from a zygote to an embryo to a baby. And so like, to say that there's like this person over here is the mother, it's falling into the same trap as the lie that Sarah and Abraham bought into, is that Hagar is not going to be the mother, Sarah is going to be the mother, when in fact, in reality, no, Ishmael knew Hagar as his mother. And that's why it led to, when finally Sarah did get pregnant in Genesis, it led to the conflict between Hagar and Sarah, and then the eventual conflict between Ishmael and Isaac, because they both had a mother, and the mother was the one who was their relational mother as well as their biological. When you separate this, it creates disorder, psychological and spiritual and emotional disorder.
No, and we've seen that. Just recognizing, God bless any woman or family who's adopted a baby, and like, in a sense, adopt a baby that's not biologically their own child. And they've gone through that process, and it's a difficult process. But we recognize, and we should recognize, that as much as possible, if a child can be with their biological parents, that should be the norm. That should always be the norm, and we've seen this with kind of like decrying Western orphanage practices, where like, Western countries going to or people from Western countries going to orphanages in developing countries and adopting kids that maybe actually have parents somewhere, because we could see that, be like, oh, that's horrible, and we can decry that, even there was probably very good intentions there. But what it's pointing to is there's something intrinsic to this relationship that can't be just broken or reset as much as we want without doing profound damage to the woman who's having the baby, towards the parents, the donors of sperm and eggs and everything else that are involved in this, and of course the child. And I think the child is the one who's always going to suffer through this. The fact that through IVF, oftentimes many children are conceived, sometimes excess, quote unquote, which is God have mercy on us, is a terrible phrase, are aborted, or that just kind of recognizing that once we start to normalize this, then the exploitation and even destruction of human life becomes normal. And that's the tragedy that we are seeking to avoid when we're opposing in vitro fertilization, when we're opposing this reality of cloning as that's kind of developing now, and also within this industry that we call surrogacy.
Yeah. So I mean, really, in culture, as we're seeing, and this term sounds so cliche-ish now because I've heard it for so many years. But as we're seeing the breakdown of the family, as we're seeing the breakdown of marriage as we've known it, as it's biblically taught, as it's been a part of the fabric of the culture of society in the West for centuries now, as we see that breaking down, I mean, we look at all these things that are happening that are coming from it and the breakdowns of all those things as well. As you was pointing out at first, you pointed out those several different ways that it's just continued to break down to this. It's almost like, well, I mean, there is a philosophical idea of deconstructionism, deconstructing, what's come before us and to a certain extent, bringing it to its simplest form or bringing it to a different reality or to reality itself. It depends on which side of the argument you're on this. And it seems as if this is, if you're not coming from a Catholic perspective or a Christian perspective, it's almost as if this is a necessary thing for survival. I mean, that's kind of what you're getting the feel of is that, we have to do this. And we're talking about in civilized countries.
Yes, but if our families continue to break down and we continue having non-nuclear families and things like that, it is necessary for survival.
It is, right. Well,
so like
that's kind of what I was getting to is because of all those other things that are breaking down, this is starting to become to a certain extent necessary. And so, so the question has to be asked, at what point, and this is something we can't necessarily answer, but at what point are we going to come to realize that this can't keep going on? I mean, what's going to happen if we continue to allow this to go on? I mean, because it seems like, well, this is the end of it, what's next? But there's always a next. There's always a thing that's next that could possibly happen that could possibly make this worse.
Absolutely. Well, we've already seen it, and I think this is the effect too and you're starting to see secular commentators starting to wake up to this. Non-religious people, and we in the religious, as Catholic Christians have been saying this for a very long time, of just this avoiding of having children entirely. This recognition that the Western world is on a demographic, bubble that's about to burst, or maybe already has burst. All of Western Europe. All of Western Europe is already beyond the replacement level as far as the number of kids. If you're at 1.2 children or 0.9 children per married couple, you're not replacing yourself, which means you have an aging demographic. You have just young people who don't have people their own age to grow up with, as far as that reduces the number of spouses, options for spouses and relationships that they have. It's going to put a huge tax burden. Again, this is just using kind of like secular things on this. So in a sense,
Social Security, Medicare, all that. Yeah.
But this has come through the undermining of the family. This has come through the undermining of sex. This has come from the removal of sex from marriage and our relationship with God and our relationship with a broader society. It's now become a personal, selfish source of identification and knowledge. And once we've done that, in a sense, this is kind of just sort of the last vestiges of some people say, like, it would be nice to have a baby. And so I might as well, use this surrogacy means in order to do that. So it makes sense. And none of this is a condemnation of individual people. I don't say that. I recognize we're all part of this culture and affected by it, but we need to wake up to the fact that God invites us to something else. And part of that is the reality of marriage as a lifelong union, as we said, between one man and one woman, and the openness towards life and towards being open to life. If some people are going through the very painful process of infertility, then there are morally laudatory ways of dealing with that, of helping them to, towards that. The church has lots of great ministries and hospitals that are dedicated to that. Think of the Paul VI Institute out of Omaha, Nebraska. But in a sense, it's all kind of trees, fruit off the same branch or the same tree of this culture of death and exploitation that the enemy wants us to be a part of.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, guys. Was there anything
I told
else
you it was going to be real light conversation. Very.
Yeah, man. I mean, complete societal collapses. I mean, whatever.
Yeah, that's all. Just civilization folding in on itself. I will.
Can I end that? I just baptized my 23rd of my nieces and nephews. So I just want to give a shout out to Isaiah and just the recognition of the goodness of life, recognition of the goodness of parents. We love you guys. We're praying for you and praying for families too.
Awesome. That's great. Oh yeah. Well, thank you, Tom and Father Tom and Father Mike, and thank you for joining us as well. Hope to see you again on Catholic in America. God bless.
Whatever the original intent for social media was, it probably wasn't this.
Well, I'm sure you've seen this viral video.
And to the B.
Gaming Week Day 3.
This egg is the most liked Instagram picture.
Hi. Impressive carrying skills, right?
Okay, so tell me all about this.
Yikes. See what I mean? However, at St. Dominic Media, we found a much better way to do social.
It is a joy, a pleasure to want to spend time with the Lord and with one another.
If you delight in the Lord, he would give you the desires of your heart. And so I prayed him to send me to the right church. And so he led me to the one that he established, which is the Catholic Church.
So I'm sitting in my quiet space, my time with God, praying for my grandchildren.
Understand that the devil isn't only the enemy of our souls, he's the enemy of our human nature. And so what God has joined, he wants to rupture.
Judeo-Christian values.
You corrected it. Judeo-Christian values. Your brain corrected it. Oh, that's fantastic. Every year, we produce hundreds of dynamic, faithful Catholic videos that reach millions of people, both online and on television. At St. Dominic Media, we're doing the heavy lifting of creating good, quality Catholic content, and we'd love for you to partner with us, either by visiting stdominicmedia.com and following the share link, or by using the offertory envelopes offered by your parish from OSV. Help us sow seeds far and wide as we use new media's potential for good. Together, let us invest in and grow the kingdom.